In my video about the High Elven Lord Glorfindel, I often claimed he could see the unseen part of the world because he saw the light of the Two Trees of Valinor. In this episode, I want to talk about what that means and how I came up with this idea. I have to admit it definitely is an interpretation of me, but what evidence is there for it? To answer this, we will look a lot into the books so that you can come up with your own conclusions and maybe agree or disagree with me. Prepare for many quotes. We will also briefly talk about what the unseen is and if elves could see better than men. But before we start, I try to pronounce names as Tolkien described it, or it makes sense. This includes a trilled R sound. Spoiler warning, and big shoutouts to Sara Morello Art. I literally just got the permission to use her artworks, which is much appreciated. Feel free to check her gallery on DeviantArt. Also, big shoutouts to the other artists, Niati, NF, Kimberly80 and Laura Tolton for allowing me to use their fantastic artworks. I made at least 3 videos where I already covered the unseen in Tolkien's world. The topic is so complex that they won't be the last videos. However, for this dive into the topic, I will explain it again and present you the quotes from the books. Tolkien's world has 2 components, a seen physical part and an unseen part, also sometimes called race world. It is not 100% clear to me if the unseen itself could also have different components, and the race world is maybe one of those. That's a topic for another video. What the seen, the physical component of the world is pretty clear, but what is the unseen component? The example pretty much everyone has heard about is the use of the One Ring by, for example, Bilbo or Frodo. When they put on the One Ring, they become invisible. The invisibility is, however, not achieved by becoming transparent or bending light around the wearer. Actually, the One Ring's power is not invisibility. That someone who wears the One Ring becomes invisible is just a side effect. What the ring does to make, for example, Frodo invisible is moving him into that unseen component of the world to some degree, at least so much that he is not visible in the seen component anymore, and at the same time the wearer can see the unseen component of the world. Tolkien explained in letter 131. And finally, they, the Rings of Power, had other powers more directly derived from Sauron, such as rendering invisible the material body and making things of the invisible world visible. So the body becomes invisible and the unseen itself can now be seen. We find this further explained directly in The Lord of the Rings in the chapter Many Meetings. This dialogue between Frodo and Gandalf in Rivendell is also one of the main sources for what we know about the unseen. I also read it in the Glorfindel video. They, these elf lords like Glorfindel, do not fear the ring race, for those who have dwelt in the blessed realm live at once in both worlds, and against both the seen and the unseen they have great power. I thought that I saw a white figure that shone and did not grow dim like the others. Was that Glorfindel then? Yes, you saw him for a moment as he is upon the other side, one of the mighty of the firstborn. The firstborn is a term that references the elves. This statement clearly speaks about the existence of the unseen and that those who dwelt in Aman, the blessed realm, also known as the Undying Lands, which is the west continent of Tolkien's world, exist in both components at the same time. As explained in episode 21 of the film and book Differences series, Frodo, through his Morgul wound, was slowly becoming a wraith and moved more and more into the unseen. I think that is why he started to see the unseen without using the One Ring. And he describes that all others who are not very present in the unseen appear dim. The first Lord of the Rings film depicts that great in the Weathertop scene. We see Aragorn, Dim and the Ring Wraiths, who were almost completely moved to the race world, glowing in the background. The Nazgûl themselves are actually without their robes, almost invisible, as Gandalf explains. Just as the black robes are real robes that they wear to give shape to their nothingness when they have dealings with the living. Frodo further describes a glowing figure that he saw before he became unconscious. Gandalf confirms that this is the very powerful elf lord Glorfindel, who has dwelt in Aman and exists in both parts at once because of that. And this is how he looks on the other side, the unseen. But in addition, he also exists in the seen world. In my opinion, the existence in the seen and unseen is however not binary. Frodo described seeing his friends as dim figures, so they maybe have an unseen part too, but it's almost invisible or almost non-existent there. Same with the Nazgûl, as they could still give robes a shape and interact with the seen world. Maybe the robes were special though. Aragorn describes it like this. They themselves do not see the world of light as we do, but our shapes cast shadows in their minds which only the noon sun destroys. That is why they avoid light, why they sniff, and why they need their horses. I have the theory that a little bit of their former seen part is maybe left since they were once men, even if it's just infinitesimal, infinitely small, that maybe allows them to still interact a bit with the physical world and see shapes of it, but this is just my interpretation. How much the unseen can interact with the seen and vice versa is, however, open for debate and probably dependent on the might or even the exact nature of the being. The ring wraiths could interact with the physical world, it seems. Some people speculate it maybe has to do with some assumed magical properties of their robes. I, however, could find no direct evidence for that in the books. The robes definitely reduced the terror they induced. Quote from the Unfinished Tales. Moreover, their chief weapon was terror. This was actually greater when they were unclad and invisible, and it was greater also when they were gathered together. In my opinion, that could be more likely a side effect of simply covering their true form than a magical property. If you are afraid of, for example, spiders and see one, putting, let's say, a towel over it would probably make you less terrified as long as it stays under that towel. I know that's probably a stupid example. As said, I could find no evidence for magical robes. They could also ride their horses without them, which for me counts as an interaction with the physical world. When they chase Frodo to the river Bruinen, they cast aside their cloaks and continued riding. Quote, he, Frodo while riding, could see them clearly now. They appeared to have cast aside their hoods and black cloaks. There are also other unusual interactions between seen and unseen. Interestingly, in The Hobbit, using the One Ring still makes Bilbo cast a shadow. Quote, you were invisible, only in the full sunlight could you be seen, and then only by your shadow, and that would be shaky and faint. This, in contrast, is missing in all films. There is, however, no indicator that this was also the case for the Nazgûl. An explanation for this could be that using the One Ring seems to move you only to some degree into the unseen. Quote, you were in gravest peril while you wore the ring, for then you were half in the race world yourself, and they might have seized you. However, ringwraiths still had a body in some form. In The Lord of the Rings, we can read about undead flesh when the Witch King is defeated by Éowyn and Merry. The Hobbit stabbed his barrow blade into the Witch King's leg. Quote, no other blade, not though mightier hands had wielded it, would have dealt that foe a wound so bitter, cleaving the undead flesh, breaking the spell that knit his unseen sinews to his will. There is another interesting situation. We already had the example of the ringwraiths riding their real horses while casting away their cloaks. Another example would be the Witch King wearing a real crown under his hood. Quote, The Black Rider flung back his hood, and behold, he had a kingly crown, and yet upon no head visible was it set. And if you wonder, yes, it was a real crown. A crown of steel he bore, but between rim and robe naught was there to see, save only a deadly gleam of eyes, the lord of the Nazgûl. It even made a sound when it fell down after the Witch King's defeat. The sword broke sparkling into many shards, the crown rolled away with a clang, Eowyn fell forward upon her fallen foe. So it seems the interaction with the physical world was somewhat similar to that of, for example, Frodo using the One Ring. Gollum, for example, bites off Frodo's finger while the latter is invisible, so it even works this way around. However, ring wraiths and men or hobbits using the One Ring are, in my opinion, very special cases. With this, we have a basic understanding of the unseen and know that some beings mostly exist in the seen, others in the unseen, and some even in both. Beyond wraiths, we also have Ainur, that are spirit beings, basically angels that exist in the unseen. These powerful beings can make themselves a body. They also exist in both worlds in this case. Sauron, Gandalf, Saruman, Radagast or Melian are good examples. All of them are Maiar, so angels of lower rank. Then we have the high powers of the world, or angels of highest rank, the Valar. One of them, the Valar Varda, also known as Elbereth Gilthoniel in Sindarin, had potentially a powerful ability. We will talk about that later. Let us now move to our initial question. Who could see the unseen? It seems clear that those who existed in the unseen could also see the unseen. Gandalf explains to Frodo in the chapter Many Meetings of the Lord of the Rings, as mentioned before, "You were in gravest peril while you wore the ring, for then you were half in the wraith world yourself, and they might have seized you. You could see them, and they could see you." Gandalf also indicates that the wraiths can't see the seen. The riders made straight for you as soon as you fled. They did not need the guidance of their horses any longer. You had become visible to them, being already on the threshold of their world, and also the ring drew them. So this is also a function of their horses, which were real. Quote, "They were terrible to behold, but why would we all see their horses? Because they are real horses." As mentioned, Frodo could only see his friends as dim figures when he was very close to become a wraith himself. This is, in my opinion, different for Ainur, even if they only exist as spirit beings, because those who entered Arda, the world, are bound to it by Eru Ilúvatar, that is God. In the Silmarillion we can read, "But this condition Ilúvatar made, or it is the necessity of their love, that their power should thenceforward be contained and bounded in the world, to be within it forever, until it is complete, so that they are its life and it is theirs, and therefore they are named the Valar, the powers of the world." I assume this is similar for the Maiar too, who are the servants of the Valar, and in addition, as powerful beings, they have power over both, seen and unseen, and they also made physical forms for them later. So in my opinion, for example, Gandalf can see the unseen too, even though as Istar his power was diminished, as we learn in the Unfinished Tales. For they must be mighty, peers of Sauron, but must forgo might and clothe themselves in flesh, so as to treat on equality and win the trust of elves and men, but this would imperil them, dimming their wisdom and knowledge, and confusing them with fears, cares, and wearinesses coming from the flesh. I would consider this quote as plausible, even though it's from Tolkien's once unpublished notes that did not make it into The Lord of the Rings. Considering that the powerful Ainur came into the world to shape it, it makes sense that they can see both, while this is different for ringwraiths, who are far less powerful and were once men. These men were once also only dim figures in the unseen. Then they got transformed into wraiths and lost most of their seen part, including the ability to see it. In addition, daylight and, for example, fire also weakens them. Men of course could not see the unseen, as its existence is new to Frodo and needs to be explained by Gandalf. Hobbits count towards men. Even a Dunedain like Aragorn or Boromir can't see Frodo when he uses the One Ring, but what about elves? As explained earlier, Glorfindel is explicitly mentioned to exist in both worlds at once. We also find a quote that proves his ability to see the unseen. When he inspects the hilt of the Morgul blade that wounded Frodo and Aragorn took with him from Weathertop, Glorfindel says, "There are evil things written on this hilt," he said, "though maybe your eyes cannot see them." And writings on the hilt were not mentioned before when Aragorn looked at it. Glorfindel is also sent because he can write open against the 9 Nazgûl alone. The ability to percept them is maybe one part why he could do so. However, not all elves could see the unseen, even though they seem to have great eye vision. We can read about Legolas in Lord of the Rings. "Suddenly the great bow of Lorien sang, shrill went the arrow from the elven string. Frodo looked up. Almost above him the winged shape swerved. There was a harsh croaking scream as it fell out of the air, vanishing down into the gloom of the eastern shore." So Legolas killed the winged steed, also called or described as fell beast, of one of the Nazgûl, and that in the dark of the night. We can also read his eyes were keen. In the Unfinished Tales we find another hint towards the eye vision of the elves. "Short is the sight of mortal men," said Voronwe. "I see the eagles of the Chrysaegrim, and they are coming hither. Watch a while." Then Tuor stood at gaze, and soon high in the air he saw 3 shapes beating on strong wings down from the distant mountain peaks, now wreathed again in cloud. So it seems elves had superior eye vision compared to men, at least the elves Legolas and Voronwe, and maybe could also see quite well at night, even when they were not able to see the unseen, as we also find many examples for. If we think of the Hobbit, we know that Bilbo could not be seen by any of the elves in Thranduil's realm while using the One Ring, so they can't see the unseen. The matter of the Hobbit is of course complicated because originally when it came out in 1937, the concept of the One Ring did not exist yet, and the Ring of Bilbo was just a magical ring that granted invisibility. Still, in my opinion, Tolkien delivered later a fitting explanation why that was the case with the mentioned quote, "For those who have dwelt in the blessed realm live at once in both worlds." The elves of the Elven King who became Thranduil with the release of The Lord of the Rings, the name Thranduil does not appear in The Hobbit, were Sylvan Elves, a subclan of the Nandor Elves. And Thranduil himself was a Sindar. Both Nandor and Sindar Elves were subclans of the Teleri clan, and these two subclans never left Middle-earth. As a result, they never lived in Aman. Those elves were therefore called Moriquendi, which means Elves of Darkness. This is different for some Noldor elves like Galadriel or Glorfindel, who were so-called Calaquendi, which of course means Elves of Light. For completeness' sake, there was actually one Sindar elf who visited Aman, the first king of the Sindar, King Thingol, also known as Elwe, husband of Melian the Maya. He was one of 3 elven ambassadors to visit the Valar in Aman to initiate the Great Journey. When they returned to their people in Middle-earth, they convinced most of them to journey to Aman. Those 3 ambassadors became the first kings of the 3 great elven clans of the elves, Vanya, Noldor and Teleri. They're also the Avari. See my History of the Elves video for more information. Interestingly, there is a probability that the Elven King from The Hobbit was originally intended to be Thingol, and the story would have played during the First Age, but Tolkien abandoned that idea because he was still working on his mythology and needed to finish his book. You can read about it in the History of The Hobbit. However, Bilbo was very careful while invisible sneaking around the Elven King's halls and was never in the line of sight of the Elven King, so it would have worked if the Elven King would have been Thingol instead too, who in my opinion could see the unseen because of his visit in Aman. The second Hobbit film has a cool scene where Thranduil seemingly detects Bilbo, but of course he did not see him because he never visited Aman, as we have learned. The scene is not in the book though. This would have been different for Galadriel or Glorfindel. But what is so special about Aman that it makes elves see the unseen and even exist in both worlds at once? Even though there are some statements and information, there is also a bit of my own interpretation here. Coming back to the initial question, I always claim that it has to do with the Two Trees of Valinor. Those trees emitted light in Tolkien's mythology, and that even before sun and moon existed. So they were the only light source in the world, except for some stars. They brought light into the dark, and out of the dew of one of the trees, the mentioned Valar and Varda formed new stars and star constellations and placed them in the sky. So parts of the starlight is related to those trees, and later out of those trees last fruit and last flower, sun and moon were formed. Those cosmic bodies that have a huge impact on the world. We find an interesting quote in the Silmarillion. The Noldor, outnumbered and taken at unawares, were yet swiftly victorious, for the light of Aman was not yet dimmed in their eyes, and they were strong and swift and deadly in anger, and their swords were long and terrible. This light of Aman, and I would expand it also to the presence of the high powers, the Valar and also the Maiar in Aman, had an impact on the elves. This light and the Valar gave the elves sight and power, which also could diminish over time, it seems. And some even got wisdom. For example, we can read about the Vanyar elves. The Vanyar indeed held him, the first Dark Lord Morgoth, in suspicion, for they dwelt in the light of the trees and were content. We also spoke about the terms Moriquendi, elves of darkness, and Calaquendi, elves of light. In those, we again find the concept of the mentioned light. In the Silmarillion, we can read, "In those days, elves and men were of like stature and strength of body, but the elves had greater wisdom and skill and beauty, and those who had dwelt in Valinor and looked upon the powers as much surpassed the dark elves in these things as they in turn surpassed the people of mortal race, only to the realm of Dorias, whose queen Melian was of kindred of Valar, did the Sindar come near to match the Calaquendi of the blessed realm." The mentioned powers are the Valar, who created the trees, and they had an effect on the elves too. The light of the trees is not mentioned here, but we find again the term Calaquendi and dark elves, which Tolkien uses sometimes for different things, a topic for another video. Here he means the Moriquendi, the elves of darkness who never dwelt in Aman. Also Melian the Maya is mentioned. We come to her in a moment again. Quote, "And he, the Valar Orome, chose from among them ambassadors who should go to Valinor and speak for their people, and these were Ingwe, Finwe, and Elwe, who afterwards were kings. And coming, they were filled with awe by the glory and majesty of the Valar, and desired greatly the light and splendor of the trees." Here we see the quote that describes what I just said a moment ago about the elven clans and the great journey. It again mentions the Valar and the light of the trees. Keep in mind, Elwe becomes King Thingol of Doriath, and visiting Aman makes him very special among the Sindar, who are elves of darkness. Elwe later sees Melian the Maya in the forest, and they fall in love. Her being from Aman filled her with the light of the trees, and in addition she was a Maya, a powerful servant of the Valar. And out of the darkness he, Elwe, looked at her, and the light of Aman was in her face. And greatly though he, Elwe or Thingol, had desired to see again the light of the trees, in the face of Melian he beheld the light of Aman as in an unclouded mirror, and in that light he was content. His people gathered about him in joy, and they were amazed, for fair and noble as he had been, now he appeared as it were a lord of the Maiar, his hair as grey silver, tallest of all the children of Ilúvatar, and a high doom was before him. So we find many examples in the Silmarillion that this light empowered elves, not always though they became wise. Fëanor, who also lived in Aman, is a good example. Even King Thingol in his later years did things that were not so wise, but so did Saruman too. I interpret this that the light of the trees and the presence of the Valar made the elves more powerful and moved them in parts into the unseen. For those who have dwelt in the blessed realm live at once in both worlds. To answer the question why that is, I have to interpret further. Of course, the light of the trees is mentioned multiple times as shown and must be special. It makes also sense that light makes you see. You could say it uncovers the unseen. We find in addition an interesting hint in the creation story of the two trees. Allow me to read a longer passage from the Silmarillion, also beautifully written. Before its western gate there was a green mount, Ezelohar, that is named also Corolaire, and Yavanna hallowed it, and she sat there long upon the green grass and sang a song of power, in which was set all her thought of things that grow in the earth. But Nienna thought in silence, and watered the mold with tears. In that time the Valar were gathered together to hear the song of Yavanna, and they sat silent upon their thrones of council in the Mahanaxar, the ring of doom, near the golden gates of Valmar, and Yavanna Kementari sang before them, and they watched. And as they watched upon the mount, there came forth two slender shoots, and silence was over all the world in that hour, nor was there any other sound save the chanting of Yavanna. Under her song the saplings grew and became fair and tall, and came to flower. And thus there awoke in the world the two trees of Valinor. Of all things which Yavanna made, they have most renown, and about their fate all the tales of the elder days are woven. Yavanna is the Vala of nature, you could say. Queen of Earth she is called. She created those two trees, but also all other Valar listened and watched, and what happened was in their consent too. Them sitting on their thrones in the Ring of Doom amplifies this scene and connects it to the doom or fate of the world. The sentence about their fate, all the tales of the elder days are woven, underlines this further in my opinion. The true beauty of this story, however, lies in the line, but Nienna thought in silence and watered the mold with tears. What does this mean? Nienna is the Vala of mourning and pity. Gandalf, in Aman he is called Olorin, once served her, and he was among the wisest of the Maiar, and he learned from her, quote, "Wisest of the Maiar was Olorin. He too dwelt in Lorien, but his ways took him often to the house of Nienna, and of her he learned pity and patience. And further, she brings strength to the spirit and turns sorrow to wisdom." Nienna is for sure an inspiration for wisdom around the concept of pity, and she can cleanse sorrow into wisdom and give back strength to the mind. If we come back to the creation story of the two trees, her tears of pity, wisdom and insight are also part of the two trees of Valinor. So in my opinion, this is one element among others that makes the light of the trees so special. Deep inside it there is wisdom, and you maybe can find strength of mind in it too. The silence of the world underlines this, as in that moment this wisdom filled the world a bit. The further story of that light continues in very complex ways with the creation of the three Silmarilli by Fëanor, that are three gems containing some of the light of the two trees. The wisdom and insight might be one reason, at least in my opinion, why even the unseen now can be seen by those who lived in Aman. Of course, I must add, also the majesty of the Valar might be another factor, and still not all elves in Aman were wise, but the light gave them the potential to become wise. The land of Aman itself is, however, not the reason for this effect. Quote, "And were you so to voyage that escaping all deceits and snares you came indeed to Aman, the blessed realm, little would it profit you, for it is not the land of Manwë that makes its people deathless, but the deathless that dwell therein have hallowed the land, and there you would but wither and grow weary the sooner, as moss in a light too strong and steadfast." There's also another interesting idea in very early drafts of Tolkien. We find it in the Book of Lost Tales Part 1. However, it disappeared in his later works and is related to the mentioned Varda. It contradicts the later version we know from the Silmarillion. I would not consider this early version canon. Here is the short version of this early draft. After the destruction of the two lamps, which were giant lights made by Varda on two gigantic towers functioning as light source of the world in the time before the two trees, the Valar and especially Varda collected the lamps' remaining light and the light of the world, stored it in two gigantic cauldrons in a liquid form and poured it over the world again. This is then connected to the creation of the two trees, having a bit of that light in them. Here Varda is connected to the light of the trees. She is part of the light's origin, you could say, and this is quite interesting in combination with one of her abilities I mentioned earlier. She is the queen of the stars and connected to light, and in a much later writing we find in Morgoth's ring, we learn about this ability she got from Eru Ilúvatar, that is God. Quote, "To Varda, Ilúvatar said, I will give unto thee a parting gift. Thou shalt take into air a light that is holy, coming new from me, unsullied by the sword and lust of Melkor, and with thee it shall enter into air, and be in air, but not of air. Wherefore Varda is the most holy and revered of all the Valar, and those that name the light of Varda name the love of air that Eru has, and they are afraid, less only to name the one." So, in addition, the light of Varda was holy, not from this world, and not marred or sullied by Morgoth, who was once known as Melkor. While in the Silmarillion we have today, Varda seems not directly connected to the light of the two trees, she was connected to it in earlier versions. This idea may be lived on with Varda hallowing the three Silmarilli with, I assume, the mentioned ability, and the Silmarilli contain the light of the trees and burn those with evil in them who touch them. The origin of the light of the two trees is sadly not more explored in the Silmarillion, but I like the idea of it being connected to Varda and the light of the two lamps. With this we have a lot of puzzle pieces and hints why the light of the two trees was so special and why it and the presence of the Valar who created them empowered the elves, shedding light into the unseen and giving the potential for insight and wisdom. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. This was a very complex topic to cover, and the video got twice as long as planned, which is why it took me so long to make it. Quality needs some time. I know the topic is maybe a bit special. Let me know in the comments. In case you liked it, feel free to press the like button, leave a comment, recommend me further, and maybe check my other videos. I'll link a playlist in the description. If you want to subscribe, feel free to press the annoying bell. Again, shoutouts to the artists, especially Kimberly80, also shoutouts to the people on my Discord server who helped me looking for some quotes. Again, thank you for watching, all the best in these difficult times, and goodbye.